Real Talk with Scott Baker and Jen Sammons interviews those incredible writers who have successfully crossed over from page to screen and vice versa. Coming at you every other Tuesday as their schedule permits. You won't want to meet this one. Details to come.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Scott. Jen can't be with us tonight. Jen is sunning herself on the lovely beaches of Florida, so we can't blame her for not being here. Tonight, we have got a really special guest, Gary Lee Vincent. He is a producer, director, writer, and an act. You've been in, 60 films?
Well, actually, it's over 140 films and TV shows.
Yeah, including Stranger Things and The Walking Dead, right?
Yes, those too.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about those later. But the big reason I wanted you on the show was, as people can see above, I was at the Living Dead weekend last month, and I was walking by Gary's table, and I saw the book Crack Coon. And I know what was coming out into a movie. We've been talking about it on one of our shows, Watching Weird, because they're making so many now after Cocaine Bear. And I read the book. The book is fantastic. Go pick it up, read it. It is a fun read. It's well written. It actually reads like a movie. So I wanted to have you on the show. I wanted you to tell me about the book. And I also want you to tell me about the other two books that you've got coming up that might be made.
Yes.
Especially the Sasquatch one.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Scott. I appreciate that. Yes, so Crack Coon is an interesting little woodland story. Crack Coon came about by my friend Brad Twigg and I. We were wanting to get, we had worked together in 2017 and 18 on several projects. And then around that time, we started working on our own independent things. I got into film distribution, and he got into doing a lot of shows like Shriek Show and Death Board and some other horror films. I'd done a lot of other things. And we decided to come back together after about 5 years to work on some kind of a joint project. And back in 2018, we had this comedy that was on the table called Virgil that we thought about bringing it back out, and that would be the one that we worked on this year. But around the same time, we had all this hoopla about Cocaine Bear, and long before it came out, but they had that really cool poster of the bear with the white powder all over. Brad was jokingly saying we should do a woodland type animal, you know, and I was working on this outline for a story that dealt with, and he had sent me this picture, it's a meme of a raccoon that was kind of like the Cocaine Bear thing, all jacked out. He said, well, what if we did something about a crack coon instead of a cocaine animal or anything? And neither of us, you know, like I say, we're started working on this well before Cocaine Bear came out, but Cocaine Bear obviously was in the works and had a lot of buzz about it. So the joke was come up with something with instead of a killer raccoon, it would be a crack coon. So I had proposed an outline, and I realized that he had another gentleman named Todd Martin that was working on the screenplay. So a lot of times, if a book comes out after the screenplay, they derive it more from the movie. And sometimes when a movie's coming out before, and the book's out long enough, then it'll be derived from the book. But in this case, both stories were derived from an outline that I'd set up along with the meme raccoon that Brad was sharing around of how we could make a crack coon. And so that's how we started it. And when I was dabbling in the storyline, while I was writing the novel, Todd Martin was working on the screenplay. So only thing that we knew is we would write both types of stories, and then Brad, being the director of the film, would take the best of both and whatever he liked from either version. But both stories followed the same outline or the same premise, and we just approached the stories differently. So mine's more of a narrative tale or a theater in the mind, and Todd's was straight screenplay, and Brad took pieces of both and made a new iteration of the screenplay that really works and comes off extremely funny. And when I was working on that universe, there were other animals in this, basically an Appalachian community, and how this simple, not exactly redneck, but kind of redneckish backwoods community gets impacted by these crazy animals. So on one hand, you have a drug problem, but not just any drug, a new kind of crack synthetic drug that actually makes some users violently mad, but it really affects the animals. And so obviously this one, it has an orange smell to it and an orange collar. And one of the side effects is it causes like an orange drainage around the eyes. So in the book, we call it Agent Orange. Because of the orange theme about it. In the movie, they call it the acid mine drainage, because one of our girls that was actually operating the Crackoon said that the side effect reminded her of when like strip mines come into a community, and obviously like where we're at in West Virginia, there's a lot of coal mines and things. So you have acid mine drainages is like a sulfuric runoff from these projects. So that's how the movie differentiated a little bit. So when I was working on Crackoon, we thought about other words that would fit. And I came up with a sequel called Crocodile. Again, another animal that Brad liked when we were coming up with the name. So we had these list of animals we didn't want to go to waste. So I have a follow-up where there's a Nile crocodile that's in a zoo that gets stolen by animal abductors that are trying to sell it on the black market. And they, of course, get into a wreck when they're transporting their stolen merchandise down through the Appalachian woods. And, of course, it's in the same area. So obviously the events of Crackoon will fuel the events of Crocodile. And then Brad was jokingly saying, well, we ought to do a Bigfoot movie in the same vein. And so the third one that'll be out soon is called Crack Squatch. So these stories are basically think tanks of comedy, and they're jokes and they're ways to portray over the top humor. And of course, Brad is known for these really graphic depictions of things. He's a big fan of 80s slasher films. So obviously that sort of tempos his things that he likes to see on film to make it more like Herschel Gordon Lewis blowing up, busting brains out on the screen, or things that you might not typically see in a Hollywood movie, but going for full throttle indie film horror mixed with comedy. That's what we're delivering in the movie. And I tried to do something like that narratively in the book. And so we're hoping that if a person wanted to learn about the movie and read the book, there'll still be plenty of surprises in the movie to be satisfactory to see it and experience it two different ways. Even the characters' names are different between the two, but the characters themselves are the same. For example, when I was writing the book, I made sure that the character I wanted to play was named Gary. Gary Bentley in the book. And when Todd was working on the screenplay, he made the forest ranger, which is Gary Bentley in the book. He made the guy's name Jonathan. So it's a little different there, but still no major shifts. But there is a lot more comedic, and they push the envelope a little bit for they just no holds barred comedy horror film that's just something that's fun for people to watch, to suspend reality, suspend disbelief, and just enjoy this little creature wreaking havoc on everything.
Now, in the movie, is your wife from the book the one that likes to feed the raccoons?
No, they changed it. In the interesting approach that, and Brad, hopefully if you ever get a chance to interview him, I noticed that in the movie, they still added Charlotte, the wife. The difference in this case is that my character is more concerned about the community and the happenings up on the mountain. And so the wife is lonely and not being well attended to. So they made her less likable in the movie, and also becomes a victim of the Crackoon. where in the book, we are actually more of a team, and the raccoon's actually our pet. So it's kind of like, and that was a misdirection that was intentional in the book, is that when the raccoon's coming off of the drug and is coming back to their house to stay, because that's where it lives, it doesn't attack its owners, to show there's a way that the animal had some way of redemption, but the drug made it that way. And in the movie, there's no hope. It's just completely lost its mind and it's killing everything. So there's a distinction there, but it hits a lot of the same buttons.
And when's the movie coming out?
We don't have an actual date yet, but I know that Brad is really trying to have it out before the fall horror season, so that at various shows we may appear at, anything, we'll have movies there to either screen or at least meet and greets, so they can buy them at the table type of thing. We have a lot in the works for distribution, how we want to do it. That's still an ongoing thing, but he's definitely trying to have it out. We're going to say October, maybe as early as September, but I don't have an actual street date yet for it.
Okay. Now, Crocodile. When will the book be out?
The book's already out. Yes, it's already on Amazon. It's available. It just dropped a couple weeks ago.
I'll be picking it up tonight.
Yes, you got to check that out. It's so much fun, and we have the same kind of theme happening. It's the same little town. It's the same things, but it's just each time the animals. It's a different way they get into the crack. Each time it's like how will this one encounter it, or what will happen? How does it get the drugs? So it's not the same exact story on every one. Like bad drug dealer, loses stuff, or and then the animal gets it, which is the raccoon one. But Crocodile, it's just hungry and it breaks away because it goes wrecked in a car, or the van, the transport truck opens up in the back, and the Nile Zoo crocodile goes out looking just for something to eat. And sure enough, there's some drug dealers they're heading for a barbecue with some chicken, but it smells it and it wants that chicken, but it gets a little something extra when it goes for that.
And this one broke me up when I saw it. Crack Sasquatch.
Yeah, Crack Squatch. Yeah, Crack Squatch is definitely inspired by Brad. I was working on a couple different animals at the time. We obviously did Raccoon. Crocodile was what we were going to do second, but what would be the third one? And Brad really wanted to do something with Crack Squatch. And I know we're shifting into cryptid territory with Bigfoot, but we by this point we're all just having a good time with it. So I went ahead and went along for the ride, and so I'm working on a whole story for that. It's the draft just got finished. We're editing right now, and then I'll be sending that over to Brad as soon as I'm happy that we're hitting all the points. And again, him and the other screenwriters, they can adapt that, or they can go a completely new direction. But we do try to work together on this so that we're delivering both a unique experience on both formats, as well as something fun for everybody. Whether you like to read or whether you like to watch the movie or both, you'll be a new experience, but still in the same universe for all of them.
Yeah, I've got to. When we get off this show, I'm going to order Crocodile.
Yeah, I got a domain name called crackamals.com, like crack animals. And crackamals.com goes to my Amazon page, which has these books on it. But as we build these animals out, there'll be a collection of them inside there.
So you're going to do more?
Yeah, as long as people want them. If they run me out of town, I'll probably stop. But if some of the people are saying Crackoon and cheering me on, I'm probably just crazy enough to figure out what animal will get it next.
Well, I saw somebody already did cocaine crabs from outer space. So.
Oh yeah, that one's outrageous. The trailer is completely, I got to give them credit. They're making a movie out of something, but it's we took a little bit different approaches with our style.
Yeah, you actually used animatronics rather than just sticking plastic crabs on somebody.
Yeah, I know we're low budget, but we try to at least go a little extra on that.
So you've also been a writer. You've had about 20 books to your credit?
Yeah, it's almost closer to 30. There's some that haven't been published yet that I've been releasing them as we go. Sometimes they get released in an area when the market's not so hot, and I'll hold off on a sequel or whatever. But yes, we've since I started writing, we're closing in on 30 books.
Oh, wow. And I mean, you've got a lot of vampire series too, I saw.
Yeah, there's two of them actually. One is called Darkened Hills, or short Darkened, the West Virginia Vampire series, and that has 6 books. It started in 2010 and is set in a fictional city of Mellis, West Virginia, which is Salem spelled backwards. And if you were to go to Salem, West Virginia, you could immerse yourself in the town that is. It's in my head. It was the mirror evil image. The mirror universe Salem is Mellis, West Virginia, and so we actually had. I think Tiffany Apan, was doing an article and came down and wanted to see the locations from the story. And so Salem, West Virginia is a nice little town that's alive and well, but Mellis, West Virginia is completely dark universe. If you like gothic horror, it's out there. We had a 6-book series for that. And then there's a more urban, like nightclub style, maybe a little on the like a Sookie Stackhouse type of story without those characters, of course. But we have another one called River that's out, that's based on a nightclub owner called Douglas River, who has humanitis, which is a disease that turns vampires back into humans. So this is a unique horror story where the nightmare is on the vampire. He's being hunted by both vampire hunters as well as vampire leaderships who want to kill him and usurp his position in their hierarchy of order. So it's a unique way of telling another kind of horror story where the typical ghoul or vampire that's in vampire stories is usually the villain. In this case, he's part victim, part anti-hero. So it was just a way to tell a story differently. So we have the River series. The first 2 books, one is River. The second one is called Icarus, which is to be released, I think, here in the next couple weeks. And then the final one is called Oblivion Angels, and that one's already written, but that one comes out here probably 6 months later.
How many of those were turned into movies?
Well, none of the vampire series have been made into movies, strangely enough. We did, when I say we, I say my company, Burning Bulb Publishing, there was another series that I worked on called The Black Circle Chronicles. And book 1 is episode 1 of this mini series. So instead of it being a 1 2-hour movie represents the book, each book is an episode in a visual miniseries, and we filmed the pilot last October. Now that's not out yet, but we're hoping to have a premiere. We filmed that in Phoenix, Arizona. The first installment of the Black Circle Chronicles is called Prove Your Love, and that one is more family friendly than Crackoon. Most things will be, but it is sort of it deals in spiritual warfare. So it has mysterious dark religion versus the world type of a thing, almost the way Exorcist it works, in the sense of it's suspense. It incorporates elements of faith as well as elements of horror. So Black Circle Chronicles is exciting. In that one, I am a lead in it, where I co-star along with Julie McCullough. She's done a lot of movies, including Big Bad Mama 2 and several other ones. You might even see her on The Blob. And of course, Sharknado. I'm just giving a shout out to Julie. She's my co-star in Prove Your Love, along with Ellie Ringo and Michael Ocha Torina. So we worked on that one in October. It'll be coming out this year sometime. And that's an exciting one. And again, now that one is based on a book as well. So that I've had the honor of actually having several of my books adapted. So I'm just very lucky in that sense.
Now, were you started directing, starring, and producing after you started writing, correct?
Yes.
How did you transfer over from being just a traditional writer into directing, producing, and starring in movies?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it in more of an interesting story here. One of my company, I formed a company in 2009 called Burning Bulb Publishing, and initially we were a writers co-op, mainly just for books. And one of our writers that we onboarded was John Russo, of the legendary Night of the Living Dead co-writer who worked on that movie with George Romero. And we were each touring. I was touring mainly book-focused events, and John was touring mainly horror cons and horror-themed events. And we basically joined forces to where we would tour together on some of our tour dates. So it actually made sense because we could share the table. We could talk and strategize how we would launch our products, how we would communicate to the fans, and it was just allowed a common cause approach to things. And I remember when John had this really great book, we had just published it. It was called Dealey Plaza. And so that's a good one for your viewers out there if they want to read a great John Russo book. But I had published Dealey Plaza, and in my vampire series, the one that I had mentioned, the Darkened Hills series, it was up to book 3, I believe, at that time. And we were both touring them at shows, and we noticed there was a big line of about 40 people that came to meet John Russo, and they were all getting Night of the Living Dead posters signed. And of those 40, none of them bought either of our books, none of my vampire books, and none of the several books that John had on his table. Although touring with John, there has been many cases where they have bought books. But I was kind of just joking, but being down in the dumps at the same time. And I had worked with John Russo long enough to call him Jack. A lot of his coworkers in the film industry called him Jack Russo. So I was jokingly saying, Jack, it doesn't do me any good to sit here with all these books on the table when all you got to do is just sit there with a Sharpie and keep signing Night of the Living Dead posters. I might as well pack up and go home. And he said, Gary, you just need to be an actor, and then they'll be lining up for your autograph. I said, well, Jack, that's great, but I'm not, I was 40 at the time. I said, I'm 40 years old. I've never had an actual film education, haven't been to Hollywood, never tried acting or anything. I said, I've published books, I've done some music. I said, but I'll tell you what, if you write a screenplay that we can both star in, I'll produce it and we'll cast ourselves and we'll set it right there with Night of the Living Dead on the table for folks to buy. And I was kind of just jokingly, ribbing him there. And a couple weeks later, he calls me. He said, Gary, have you checked your inbox? And so I opened up the computer, and right there was an email from John Russo that said, my Uncle John is a zombie, a screenplay by John A. Russo. He goes, I am Uncle John. You are his dim-witted nephew, Oscar. It's set in the Night of the Living Dead universe. 40 years later, we're lampooning my project, and we're going to have fun. Are you in? So he basically threw down the gauntlet. He really did make a movie that we could both star in and make. And sure enough, I did. And at that time, working on My Uncle John's a Zombie, I started to get involved in as many projects as I could to learn the art of filmmaking. Again, with not having a traditional film education, I just went on as many projects as I could. I was sponsoring different indie films through Indiegogo and Kickstarter, and also going on to like Actors Access and Backstage.com and different places, applying for every kind of job I could just to learn the craft, so that when My Uncle John is a Zombie came out, I wouldn't be completely green to the film scene, but we would have some experience, and that we could start to connect with fans whom up until that point I've only been able to connect to as a writer. So then that added the acting layer on top of things. And then a few years into that, I was acting I was acting in a lot of films, and there was a Christian filmmaker who was making a movie with Dean Cain in Clarksburg, West Virginia, Bridgeport, West Virginia, that area. And he asked me if I would like to work on it as crew. And at the time, I was working with Brad Twigg on Wrestle Massacre. So we're at 2018 at that point. So he actually hired Brad and myself to work on a movie called A Promise to Astrid. And while working on it, he upgraded me to director of that film. So the first movie I ever directed was a Dean Cain movie, because Dean Cain is in A Promise to Astrid. And I went on to direct probably about a dozen or so films and produced a lot more than that. So that's kind of that's the short version of how I went from being a writer to being an actor to being a director in a span of about 7 or 8 years.
And I just checked it out. My Uncle John is a Zombie is available on Tubi.
Oh, yes, it is absolutely free for your viewers to watch. It's just a goofy movie. Now, keep in mind, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of haters out there because it's so indie. It's not a Hollywood movie. It doesn't have millions and millions of dollars in the budget. It was John Russo and me coming together to make a low-budget indie movie, and me not having much experience at that point, but we ended up making something. And I think it came out fairly good. It's funny and witty, and we met so many great friends doing it. I learned a lot about product merchandising through making that movie. So I ended up getting a complete film education just by working on that film with John Russo.
So what do you, of the four, what do you enjoy doing most? Writing?
My absolute favorite thing is acting. I think I like that. And I like short-term acting gigs over these real elaborate ones. For example, if I could come in and be a day player, not necessarily an extra, but if I was 1 or 2 days to be integral in a couple scenes and nail it and then go on with my life, I think I like those better than being on a set for like 6 months or having to be solely in one role. Or we were really in a pickle during COVID, which, by the way, is where I made a lot of my movies, because there were, for obvious reasons, film studios, the traditional ones, were closed. But even when it opened back up, there would be sets that would ask us to work like as an extra or as a singular role, but they would want to sequester the actors for like 6 months. So they didn't want you moving. They didn't want you to leave the sets. You would get continuous work at a really low rate because it was typical like extras, day player roles. But it was a way to keep the spread of the virus contained. So I started gravitating back more towards the independent films around that time, because some of the independents still went ahead and did their things, and they didn't have as many hard rules to follow.
Well, a lot of independent films are. There's a lot of independent films that are better than Hollywood productions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's like, as a writer, I remember, if you self-published, that was it. That was the death knell. Now, I mean, most of the people I know self-publish on Amazon, on Kindle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That was the trying to break that stigma was one of the reasons for founding Burning Bulb Publishing, as we'd always advertised it in our earliest days as a writers co-op, because we knew that there was a group, mostly independent horror writers, although that actually applies to most writing groups. But at the time, we noticed that was a big niche, was that traditional publishers wouldn't take an unknown writer, which left the unknown writer only 2 choices: either go to the vanity presses, which are just print shops that will print anything that has words. It doesn't matter if it's good or not, or if it has problems, or they would self-publish, and then there would be this glaring obviousness about it that it didn't have some level of a professional touch to it. Either it wasn't edited right, or it looks not quite right, because you can sometimes tell, especially when they first started offering ways to print on demand and stuff like that. You could always tell everybody was using the canned template for the cover or whatever. And so Burning Bulb was to fill that niche between the major publishers that use mass market paperback printing and the self-published vanity presses, that were the vanity presses being predatory, the self-publishing being riddled with mistakes. So we offered a space in there where we had many of the steps that the traditional publishers had, where we had a peer group of folks checking the manuscripts, trying to determine a way to get it published into the market, and still have insights into quality control for covers and typesetting, and making sure that when it came out, it would have the best chance that it could. Now, granted, most independent books don't sell a tremendous amount when compared to their major publisher counterparts, but we did have that intention and filled that space for many years, and still publish books, not as many as early on because we got into so much film work. Yeah. But we tried to do that, and that's the space we carved to try to give writers a way to experience a publisher and get feedback from a publisher, but not have to endure the cost of a vanity press or the ridicule of self-publishing.
Now, I want to ask you a question, because I'm was a huge fan of The Walking Dead, and I love Stranger Things. What role did you play in Stranger Things?
In Stranger Things, what you see me on is a guy at the bar in season 2, episode 9. On that same episode, I worked on 2 scenes. One was a funeral scene where I was acting in the funeral scene and then later in the same episode, I'm sitting at a bar. The funeral scene got, I know when we showed up that day and I was using wardrobe that they had picked, I realized when standing next to the father of the deceased girl in the scene, that we kind of looked similar, the way we were dressed and even the way our hair was done. And I was worried that maybe that part might get cut, and sure enough, it did. So when you see the funeral scene, you don't see me, but I did work on it. And then a couple weeks later, they called me back. I'm just sitting at the bar in another scene, but it's a pivotal scene in the movie because it's right as it's wrapping up. And they start the scene off with me holding a beer as it pulls back and Hopper passes and sets down not too far from me with Paul Reisner. And they discuss adopting 11. So I'm really proud of that one. And also in Stranger Things, I worked a lot on season 3, mostly background, but I was there for several weeks at different points working on different episodes.
And what about The Walking Dead?
The Walking Dead, yes. I'm in season 8, episode 3. It's called Monsters. I play a savior, and you can see me shooting up Alexandria with a machine gun. So I never got killed on the series, and technically I could come back, but they rotated several groups of saviors out right there at the end. But I did get on. I did great camera time. I worked with Greg Nicotero, who directed the scene. I'm very proud of it. I knew the moment it aired, people were recognizing me because my phone was blowing up, and I was getting all kinds of people taking pictures of their TV screen, and it was. I knew that that there was that it had aired and that people could relate. And I know there's people that love saviors and people that hate them, but I was glad to be a part of a polarizing group that that people could relate to when they're watching the movie, if they like the henchman or not.
Yeah, well, everybody likes a good bad guy. So now, circling around, I had a question. You wrote Crack-Coon. You wrote the book while they were doing the script.
Uh-huh.
And they were intermingling them. Are you doing the same with Crocodile and Crack?
Yeah, I know that they made creative choices in Crack-Coon that would diverge from the script. And because I wrote Crack-Coon and Crocodile at the same time, meaning, they were like, the stories were like, if they were acts in a play, Crack-Coon would be act 1, Crocodile would be act 2. So right when I was doing Crack-Coon, I kept on writing with the same characters and beats to keep the story moving along. And so they made some choices, like killing off the Ranger's wife in Crack-Coon, that diverged the story from the book. And it's a hard fork, because unless they bring a different wife in and try to mimic some of the stuff, there's things that happen in the movie that are different than what happens in the book. So they may decide to make more creative changes than the way the book's set up. Although I did write it in such a way that should Brad and Todd want to go the same way, changing the wife a little bit may be easy enough to do. It'll be up to them. I just knew that we felt like we had a pressure on us to get our properties out right away, because we saw that when Cocaine Bear was hitting really on all cylinders, then there were all these knockoff things coming. We knew that whatever originality that we had, even in the fun stuff, that there would be such a glut of stuff coming, that we wanted to make sure that people could understand that we actually were working on a legitimate property. It wasn't just knocking something off to exploit the money or whatever. But we really were trying to make a funny movie of an animal on drugs that coincidentally is caught up in the whole Cocaine Bear thing. And I know that if there was a joke, because our slogan on the top of the book is "Crack Kills," which is typical say no to drugs type of slogan. And though we actually were really kicking around, just like Cocaine Bear said, inspired by true events, we were jokingly going to put inspired by another movie, just because we know that any animal on drug movie is going to get related to Cocaine Bear in some way. So, but really we settled on Crack Kills. But who knows? Maybe when the movie comes out, it'll say something else.
And you're in it as the Ranger, correct?
Yes. That was one of the great things about working with Brad and all, was that, despite our creative changes between the two properties, he honored the fact that I kind of wanted to be the Ranger in it. So I was really happy to do that. I tell a lot of people that in this weird movie version, there aren't a whole lot of likable characters. So it is very reminiscent of old 80s slasher movies where you're kind of rooting for the villain, which is this, in our case, the Crackoon. You're kind of wanting the Crackoon just to go in and take these people out because they're not real likable.
Well, he was sort of like the anti-hero in the book.
Yes.
I'm through the whole book. It's like, I hope nothing happens to him. Now, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, so that's the kind of we know we're going to get compared with it, but I will say that when people do sit down and watch it, or they wish to read, if they read the book to begin with, you can see, if you've watched Cocaine Bear, that it is a dynamically different story and highly entertaining for people just to have fun with. It's not believable, but it's just fun.
Now, are you in Crocodile?
Yes. As far as unless between now and then I tick off the director, my character lives in the movie. I'm one of 3 that does. So obviously, the Ranger's coming back to see what the heck's going on the mountain. And when people are reporting a crocodile, which has no business being in West Virginia or even in North America, here we've got a Nile crocodile on the loose. So it's like a reminiscent of Jaws on land, eating up everything in its path.
And are you going to be in Crack Squatch? Yeah,
these books that I'm producing always have the Ranger in it. So that's kind of like my little thing. Like, well, if you want my backing on it, which I hope you do, and you want, hopefully I can get in there on some, even if it's just a cameo, even if they decide not to make it a main character. But I will say that the Ranger has been a lead character in Crackoon. It's a lead character in Crocodile, and it's a lead character in Crack Squatch. So if they keep that element of consistency, then I would be able to at least get in all the movies. So from a selfish perspective, I kind of like that.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you had like a list of animals.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what some of the other future ones are going to be?
The other animal is Crackaroo, which is a kangaroo. And then crackroaches, and and I've got like treatments for each of these of how we might be able to pull them off on film. And a couple others. We're just, a lot of times when I'm brainstorming, people will change they'll say, well, what about this? They'll move the wording around. But for the universe that I'm trying to work on, they all start with crack. So that's why it fits in the Crackamools series. Is you have Crackoon, Crocodile, Crack Squatch, and whatever we come up with as it goes. They'll typically will say crack on the front.
Now, for all the writers out there, and even me, what do you suggest? What is the best way to get your book to someone to make it into a movie?
Oh, it's a question of how. I guess well, I'm going to say this in a way that is not meant to be funny, but just a way to think, to get a person to think. And I will say is it depends on how complicated the story is and how much you're willing to be okay with it being an independent film, or if it has to go the Hollywood route, because that will make a world of difference in the level of success you can attain. When you do the Hollywood route, you really will need to go into those. I'm going to use an example, like the American film market in Santa Monica is a place where a lot of films get bought and licensed, and you have access to the showrunners. So if you're thinking about going the Hollywood route, you might want to prepare a series of one sheets for your projects, find out who you can at least temporarily attached so that they can be on your one sheet. And you can go to things like the AFM or similar film markets across the world. There's one in Hong Kong, one in Berlin, there's the Cannes one, there's different ones. And when you're at these events, you go to mixers, you go into their offices, which are hotel rooms that have agents there where you can discuss your project with them. Sometimes they'll give you a couple minutes, and then you go there and you pitch. So that's one approach. The other is to consider doing with an independent group. And in that case, my recommendation, if you've never done it before, is to go to conventions of the genre of what you're writing. So if you're writing a horror story, go to horror conventions and just start talking to people. Find out who directors are, find out who actors are. Sometimes they're the celebrity guests. You can go one step further and even buy a booth and have information about your project there. Or if you already have a book, have the book right there for sale. And while you're there, you might encounter people that they give you their business card and say they're a filmmaker, or you see, you find out who's running the show and who is the agent booker for the talent that's there, the celebrity guests, and just get a feel for the environment that you're working with in the genre that you want to pursue. And from there, you can either try to hire someone if you wish to make it yourself and be the producer, or you can begin pitching it to people. And that's through the same channels. Either I'm using a horror convention example, just because folks probably on this podcast enjoy the horror genre. Yeah. But let's just say you were making a faith-based film. They have in Orlando has an international Christian film festival. So you would go to that one and try to network with filmmakers down there for if your title would fall under that genre. So whatever your genre is, and if you have no knowledge of how the business works, that would be my primer example of what to do. Go to the conventions. If you have enough resources to set up a table, do so. Pitch your book and really be as aggressive as possible, or at least have the radar on to see who the players are. And if you have the luxury of doing more than one convention, like starting to tour around like John Russo and I often do, you'll start to see trends, and you'll start to meet people such as you and I meeting at the Monroeville Living Dead Expo. And I also met people down at the Carolina Fear Fest in Raleigh who was also interested in Raccoon. So just being there, you start to meet people that are like-minded, or at least have ways to discuss what you're working on. And just like you talking with me on this podcast, another writer might want to just talk about their book on a podcast. And who knows who is listening? You might have this brand new filmmaker that has a vision and trying to make a movie, and they hear about your book, and all of a sudden that fits what they're trying to do, and the bulb starts to roll at that point.
Now, have you ever written a screenplay?
Yeah, I wrote one called Impound. I've written several, actually, but there's one called Impound that I would really love to make into a movie. It was my answer to John Russo's Midnight, the 1982 cult classic. I wanted to write another type of a story where you have an isolated female in a backwoods struggle for survival, kind of homage to House of a Thousand Corpses. That whole vibe. I was trying to come up with something, and what had happened was right when the screenplay was finished, I then worked on the novel, so I got to do both parts. And around the time that the novel was done, John Russo came to me with Midnight to direct a remake for Midnight. So I dropped pursuing making Impound into a movie and directed his remake. The 2020s when we did it. So he did the 1982 version and I did the 2020 version. And if anybody ever wants to see the trailer, they can see that at www.midnight.rocks. And so that movie's out. It's really awesome. It won a Las Vegas Film Award for the horror category, and we really had a fun time making it and showing it. And that's an example where I had written Impound, was going to make it into a movie, had raised a little money for Impound, but we ended up making Midnight because it already had a franchise attached to it.
That was www.midnight.rocks.
ROCKS. Instead of .com, it's .rocks because it has a great soundtrack to it. Plus, the word midnight was available with that domain extension. So it made sense to at least get something that it was easy for people to find. And that will land on the official page where the trailer is. There's links to the DVD and Blu-ray and just different things about the movie, that movie, Midnight.
Okay. What do you find easier to write? A screenplay or a novel?
Well, I think screenplays would be easier to write because you don't have to go into the mind of the characters. In a screenplay, let me give you an example. The typical formula is for every page of a screenplay is a minute of a movie. And most people like to try to make their movies 90 minutes to 2 hours. But, you know, if you get past 60, you're on the home stretch. But 90 is the sweet spot. So in essence, if you look at a script, there's a lot of spaces and there's puff, and you don't have to write a lot of words to fill a page of a script. And if you can get 90 pages of script, you've got a 90-minute movie, roughly. Now, when you write a novel, you're looking at an 8.5 by 11 sheet that has multiple paragraphs on one page, and you're actually trying to bring a reader into a world that they may not ever see in film. So you're describing things and circumstances and trying to find a way to motivate them through the words you use. In a screenplay, you are writing simple actions for what the characters might say and what they might do matter-of-factly, like, you know, raccoon jumps on female victim, camera go, and sometimes you'll have camera actions in there, camera view from the raccoon looking up at the victim or something like that. You might say have blunt statements, where in the book you might tell that same thing in 3 pages where you're experiencing the victim running and their heart pumping and the things running after them. And maybe they'll trip down a ravine and you'll describe that, and you go into the whole visual theater experience solely with words. So I think that if I were to say what's more difficult is writing the narrative or the novel or the novella, whatever approach you're taking, and it's a little easier to write the screenplay. Although there are people that can't write the alternate one, though either they're really good screenwriters or they're really good novelists, but they seem to have trouble pulling from one or the other. I just was blessed with being able to do both. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried writing the screenplay, and it was just like I would describe in detail every action scene.
Yeah, and what you have to do, and it's hard, especially if you've written the book first. It's really hard. But if you haven't, then it's a little easier. It's easier to write the novel after you've written the screenplay, because then if you say Sally jumps out of the clutches of the raccoon and runs out here and does this, then you say, okay, tonight I'm going to write a 1,000 to 3,000 word essay describing what Sally did here. You know, so you can break down your project into little scenes that now you're seen as a chapter, and you can take your time and develop it out and really make it right. But when you're screenwriting, it's just this, and this, and then it's up to the director to decide if he's going to keep that or change it. And with those few statements, he'll decide what he's going to have the crew do, engage the director of the photography to see how they're going to film that. Will it be a wide shot coming in? Will it be some type of dolly effect? Will they need stunts? Whatever that, they have to work that out. But when you're writing, you're not really so much worried about the things that they got to figure out. You just try to lay the facts down on paper of what should happen.
So as the screenwriter, you look at it how you see it in your head. Now,
yeah, it helped that I've done some movies, so I had some experience in that aspect. And so I can matter-of-factly tell. When we were doing Crackoon, for example, one of my writing techniques is I'll outline what I want to happen. This scene 1 should be this, scene 2 should be this, scene 3, matter-of-factly. So I laid out the outline for Crackoon and shared it with Brad Twigg and Todd Martin. This is the beats of the film that I see it played out, and I'm going to go off and write the novel based on these beats. And so Todd said, well, based on these beats, I'm going to write the screenplay. So we kind of both did our things separate, and that was mainly to allow to have unique properties that then Brad would reconcile in a third iteration of the script. So that blended the best of both to then make his vision come to life with what he wanted to see cinematically.
So being both a screenwriter, writer, and a director, you know what it's like to actually create it and then put it onto the screen.
Yes, it's John Russo told me something, and I'm only saying this as his blurb to me. He paid me a compliment, but I don't say it as a bragging thing, but just as an important understanding of what we're learning about. Was he said that very few people get it, but you get it. And what he meant by that was to understand the timing on the camera when you're watching something or when you're editing something. It's the idea of can you blend the scenes in such a way that really it makes an entertaining movie. A lot of people, they get so hung up on wanting to capture every word of every scene and these real long monologues and trying to spend so much time on every component that it becomes such a boring, bloated mess. You have to be able, especially if you're directing and you have access to editing, editing teams and stuff like that, that you convey the vision and that you are not afraid of cutting things down to the point that it feels real life. And I say that because a lot of people don't get that. That's where they get so possessive. We had one, John and I both were reflecting on a property we saw that he worked on even, but it wasn't something he directed, that it was boring. There was places where it lacked action. And the dialogue went on and on and on. And you could say, well, that 10-minute dialogue could have been cut down to 2 to 3 minutes max and move to the next scene and just move it along. So the idea is, can you be okay even if you shot all day on a scene, can you be okay trimming it down to where the 1.5-minute version of that all-day scene works a lot better than a 10-minute version? So having that ability to make hard calls and tighten it up as best as you can so that you mimic what the human eye experiences when you're not watching a movie. And that's the magic. If you think about it, our brains are reconciling hundreds of different images all at the same time to make a reality that we're experiencing. So when you're filming something, ultimately you need to shift a lot of items or a lot of angles frequently, in my opinion. This is my opinion, of course. You have to combine a lot of visual subtleties all at once into a small amount of time to mimic that randomness of the human eye and brain interaction in reality. So if you're good at it, you won't linger on one take for a long, long, long time. You'll try to get it quick because your brain, if you're walking through a room and you're not lingering on that in your brain, you're seeing a lot of stuff. Your brain processes a tiny sliver that you experience as reality. But if you were to sit there and some people even see this under hypnosis. They can recall all sorts of peripheral data, but the brain selected the main path through the event. And that's what we do as filmmakers, is we got to take all this information and find that critical path that keeps the viewer's interest, tells the story, and delivers without making them bored out of their mind.
Now, you might have it slightly different because you're good friends with the director. But as the director, have you dealt with any writers that just, they become fanatical about their work, they don't want anything changed?
Yes, that happens frequently, actually. I don't really have a lot of feedback for like this writer strike that's going on in the Hollywood realm, but I'm sure that if they're an employed writer, they may be more amicable to fixes of the production house. If a producer comes in and says, "Hey, we want it this way. We don't like what you wrote. Write this." Mm-hmm. They may have to, even if they're stuck on their thing. But independent films often don't have that oversight. Sometimes the writer is the director, or the writer, is a producer, meaning that they financially are backing the movie, and then they dig in. If you have that going on, it will ultimately hurt the movie, because sometimes what the writer has written doesn't play well cinematically. It's just the truth of things. And if it doesn't play well, or if it goes against the vision of what the director wants, then you have a conflict. And if the writer won't allow that to change, you will get sometimes the movie that John Russo and I were talking about, where we couldn't hardly watch it. It was so boring. And it's like, well, why did you could eliminate this next 10 minutes and even eliminate the scene, and it would just flow better. And so, but they wouldn't. They wanted to talk all this frivolous stuff that's outside the main subject, because that's the way it is in the book. And the screenwriter wanted every single nuanced thing that, to be honest, the viewer of a movie didn't care about. They just wanted to see this thing attack somebody and something else happen. So it's really important that you have enough say with the writer. John Russo has a rule when he makes his own movies, that John Russo directed movies, is that the director has an ultimate authority on how the movie will go. So if the writer begins to get difficult, he then says, well, based on our contract, the director has ultimate authority. I'm making this choice. It's going to happen. And so they can be mad about it, but usually they have to fall in line. A lot of people are too much. They have their friends that they're working with, and they don't want to offend, or they really don't want to make the writer mad. And even though they're directing it, and then you end up getting a wishy-washy movie. Ultimately, if it's better for the movie, I think it still makes the writer look good if the movie comes out good, And so if a director makes a choice, that's one of the reasons I think I got along well with the Crackoon team. Was I don't care if they use the book stuff or the characters or whatever. They do. Crackoon did use a large portion of it, but I have some cool things that I would have loved to seen that they didn't use. But I'm not mad about it. I know that they made the movie that would work well cinematically, and it's hilarious. It's a very funny movie, maybe arguably funnier than the book, but I think that the book really delivers for an entertaining read, and it's a different approach, a different way we tell the story. But that's an example. I provide some great ideas, in my opinion, to their team when they're making something, and if they take them, great. If they don't, then I'll just keep going with the writing side, and we'll have these separate but related properties that still create consumable entertainment for folks.
Well, I love reading the book and then seeing the movie and comparing them.
Oh yeah, that's actually what I'm really hoping people will do. Not because I want to sell a ton of books, but I really think that it's a cool comparison, because I enjoyed. At the first time I saw the screenplay, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's. I'm not sure. I told Brad, I'm not sure I like this. This is really. You're pushing envelopes that even I didn't push in the book, and I pushed several. I said, he says, oh, this is the best story I've ever seen. This is like, I'm thinking this is what people are going to want. And I realized he was going for extreme over the top humor, and I realized, it just might work. And when you see the trailer, how outrageous that it is, I realized that he understood what he wanted, and I also knew what I wanted in the book. But they're unique and they're fun, and I think it worked out really good.
Is the trailer available?
Yes, yeah. The trailer for Crackoon is online. You can go to YouTube and just type in the word Crackoon. It's most likely going to be the first one on there. But if you want one that will always be there, if you go to crackoon.com, which is the official site for Crackoon, the trailer will be there. A link to the book will be there. And when the movie resources are out, where to buy the movie or watch it on streaming, or whatever resources come out for the movie, they will be added to that page as the deals are built.
All right. www.crackoon.com.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to definitely check that out. All right. We, at our time limit, Crackoon and Crocodile are currently in print.
Yes.
They're
both on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And Crackoon also has an audiobook. So if you're one of the types that commute a lot and just don't have time to sit there and hold a book in front of you because you're a busy person, you're traveling, well, you can go to audible.com or many of the other audiobook sites, whatever your favorite one is, and you can get the audiobook and experience it in your car or on a plane or on the subway or wherever you like to experience your audiobooks. You can get a first-hand glimpse in the theater of the mind with the Crackoon audiobook.
And Crackoon is coming out probably this fall.
Yep, Crackoon this fall. Crocodile, if all goes well, is going to start shooting in August. The book's out now, but we're still working on the post-production of Crackoon. So obviously it's not as big of a studio as Universal or whatever. So it's whatever we can get done with the time we got. But Crackoon's priority one. Crocodile will be up in priority once Crackoon's done, but Crackoon's got to come out first.
And when can we see Crack Squatch, the book?
Crack Squatch, we're probably looking about at least a month before the book gets out, maybe sooner. The book's, like I say, is done. We're just looking at the editing right now. And then after Crocodile gets filmed, then there'll probably be a meeting between Brad Twigg and then all of our team to figure out how in the world we're going to do Crack Squatch where our locations are going to be. So I would say at the very earliest, fall 23, we could start filming it.
Okay. Where can people find you?
All right. Well, my name, Gary Lee Vincent. You can go to GaryLeeVincent.com. If you're interested in our publishing thing, BurningBulbPublishing.com. That's BULB. So like burning fire, burning bulb like a light bulb, and the word publishing. So BurningBulbPublishing.com. If you want to see trailers to films that we distribute, just go to burningbulb.tv. That's our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. And that helps us get more viewers to our indie films. And like I say, if you want to see anything about Crackoon, go to crackoon.com, crocodile.com. And if you just want a quick link to the books on Amazon, crackimals.com.
So there's a website for Crocodile.
Yeah, there's Crocodile. Yeah, and it's a movie site just like Crackoon. Right now it's got the book listed, and we had an Indiegogo campaign that just concluded to get us started on the movie. That's with Brad and the team to make sure they had some resources to get working on, because those we wish the animals were free, but they do cost a little bit to get and to operate, and the catering and all the things associated with making a movie. So he did raise the Indiegogo, so we actually made the goal, so Crackoon's goal was done. So that movie is definitely coming out. Crocodile has a boost on it, so that movie has enough to get started. So we're really excited that people like what we're doing, these goofy things, and as long as people are having fun and we're enjoying it, we'll keep making and delivering these crazy entertaining items for folks.
Good. And Tony asked if Crocodile is going to be a audiobook.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I already have the audiobook. It was delivered and recorded by Michelle Bowser, and it will be out very soon. It goes through about a 30-day quality check with with departments like Audible and the other. There's ones that go into Walmart and different places. So they both outlets. We have several outlets, but they all go through like a 30-day review process, and it will be out. I don't know the exact date because it's in there. It's being reviewed right now.
All right. We're definitely gonna want you back after Crack-Coon comes out.
That'd be great. I'll be happy to be here.
We've got a show called Watching Weird where we review movies like that. That would be perfect for it.
That's great. I'm up for that for sure.
And again, I'm telling you guys, get the book. I loved the book. It was fun. I read it in a couple of days. It's a great read. And I'll be buying Crocodile right after we get off this show.
Well, I really, really appreciate your support, Scott, so much. And if any of you all like the book or have any feedback and could go on wherever, Amazon or wherever, and give it a review, that would help me out a lot because it's flying under the radar. There's a lot of momentum with the trailer of Crack-Coon, but not too many people knows about the book, and it's really fun. And I think folks like yourself will enjoy it. And if you review it, then Amazon will recommend it, and everybody wins.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know. I mean, I heard about Crack-Coon coming out, and then when I walked by your table and I saw the book sitting there, it was like, it's a book. So
yeah, that's the cool thing is most of our stuff, we do have book versions because that's part of when we're developing a story, we develop it out further with our book. And that helps too. If a person has the luxury of time and they get stumped on something, they may go back to the book and read what we did with how did we take the characters through that point. So sometimes a director may have a vision, but the book can give it a different angle. Like for example, the way the druggies encounter the drug dealer, Brad really loved how that worked in the book, and so it gets almost word for word how the book did it. So that scene was exact.
Well, we're gonna have to wrap up, everyone. Please like and subscribe to Real Talk and Watching Weird. Go to Tony. Tony's name just popped up. Go to Gary's YouTube page. Like and subscribe there. Go out and buy the book. I'm definitely going to be following the two websites. And is there anything else you wanted to say before we closed up?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in on this show, and also keep supporting the independent film, independent writing. We love you. We can't do it without you. So thank you all for staying this long and hanging out while we talk about these crazy projects.
And Tony, the movie is, I think it was one of your first movies. My Uncle
John is a Zombie. Yeah, so we have a myunclejohnisazombie.com page, which has the trailer. But that one is one of the movies that's distributed by ITN, and it's been out since 2018, and one of the very earliest movies I worked on. We started messing with that in 2014. But yes, myunclejohnisazombie.com, but you can also go on Tubi and Amazon and whichever your favorite app is, and look for myunclejohnisazombie.com and see this movie and many of the places it's free to watch. So if you want to have a fun zombie movie, you can watch it, maybe even come up with some kind of zombie drinking game or something and play with it, because it's a fun movie. It's not serious, but it was a great exposure for me to get into filmmaking, and one of the earliest projects I worked on for film.
Oh, I'm definitely going to be downloading and watching that this weekend. All right, Gary, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Everyone else, thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your week. Don't let the heat get to you, especially if you're down in the Southwest. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Love your animals. Just be careful if they're acting funny.
Yeah. Ciao, everyone.
Bye.